My name is Daniel Harper, and for most of my life I believed my father was a failure. Not because he told me that directly, because he lived like a man who had already given up on life. Cheap clothes, an old pickup truck held together by rust and duct tape, a tiny rented apartment above a hardware store. No vacations, no investments, no visible success. Growing up, I watched my friends admire wealthy fathers while I quietly felt embarrassed by mine. And honestly, that shame became one of the greatest regrets of my entire life. Because after my father died, I discovered he had secretly been a millionaire for decades. And the reason he hid it changed the way I understood love forever. Before I tell you how my father's funeral exposed shocking secrets about money, family, and sacrifice, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes the people who appear to have the least are carrying burdens nobody else can see. My father, Thomas Harper, was a difficult man to understand. Quiet, emotionally distant, unimpressed by almost everything. After my mother left when I was 11, he raised me alone in rural Kentucky. And honestly, he never seemed particularly happy about it. He worked long hours repairing industrial machinery at local factories, grease under his fingernails, back pain by 40, permanent exhaustion by 50. Our life together was simple to the point of humiliation sometimes. Secondhand furniture, expired grocery coupons, Christmas gifts bought at discount outlets. Meanwhile, classmates had fathers driving luxury cars and taking beach vacations. As a teenager, I resented him deeply. Not because we lacked money exactly, because I thought he lacked ambition. I remember one horrifying moment vividly. I was 16. A friend dropped me home after football practice in his father's new BMW. When I climbed out near Dad's rusted pickup truck, my friend joked, "Man, your dad seriously gave up on life." I laughed. Actually laughed. Along with him, that memory still makes me sick. Because later that night I saw Dad quietly standing at the kitchen sink holding unpaid medical bills from my grandmother's nursing care. And suddenly I realized something important. My father heard the joke. He just pretended not to. But back then I was too immature to fully understand sacrifice. Dad never explained himself emotionally, never defended himself, never complained. He simply kept working, kept paying bills, kept surviving. And somehow that silence made him harder to love as a teenager. When I left for college, our relationship became emotionally distant almost immediately. Phone calls short, visits awkward, conversations mostly practical. Part of me blamed him for never showing affection properly. Another part blamed myself for wanting a different father entirely. Still, despite everything, he helped me financially whenever possible. Quietly. Tuition assistance appeared unexpectedly. Emergency expenses somehow got covered. But Dad always claimed he was barely getting by. I believed him. Completely. Then life happened. Marriage. Career. Children. And gradually I started understanding adulthood differently. Especially after becoming a father myself. Because once you sacrifice sleep, money, dreams, and peace constantly for your children, you begin recognizing love in forms that once looked invisible. Still, my relationship with Dad remained complicated. He refused help constantly, wouldn't move closer to family, wouldn't upgrade apartments, wouldn't buy newer vehicles, wouldn't spend money even when he clearly could have lived more comfortably. My wife once asked, "Do you think your father is secretly depressed?" Honestly, I wasn't sure. Then came the phone call. Heart attack. Massive. By the time I reached the hospital, Dad was already unconscious. Machines breathing for him. Doctors speaking carefully. The room smelled sterile and hopeless. I remember holding his hand and realizing something devastating. I knew almost nothing about him emotionally. Not really. Then he died 2 days later. Quietly. Without ever waking up again. Grief hit me strangely. Not explosive sadness. Regret. Regret so heavy it physically hurt. At the funeral, attendants shocked me. Factory workers. Neighbors. Former co-workers. Even people I barely recognized. And every single person told similar stories. Your father helped me financially once. Your father paid for my son's surgery. Your father covered our rent during layoffs. Your father bought groceries anonymously after my husband died. Story after story after story. I stood there stunned. Because none of this matched the man I thought I knew. Then came the real shock. After the funeral, an attorney requested a private meeting. I assumed Dad had minimal savings. Maybe enough to cover burial costs. Instead, the attorney opened a file and calmly explained, "My father's estate exceeded $11 million. I genuinely thought there had been some mistake. 11 million. The room physically spun. Apparently, Dad invested quietly for decades. Factory stocks, industrial land, energy shares, extremely disciplined long-term investments, the old apartment, rented by choice, the truck, intentionnel, the simple life, completely deliberate. But why? That question haunted me immediately. Then the attorney handed me several sealed letters. Letters Dad instructed me to read only after his death. I opened the first one with shaking hands, and within minutes, I started crying so hard I could barely breathe. Because finally, for the first time in my life, my father explained himself honestly. After my mother left, Dad became terrified of instability. Terrified. His own father lost everything during bankruptcy when he was a child. Homeless shelters, food insecurity, chaos. And after Mom abandoned us, those fears intensified permanently. So Dad made a decision. He would never allow his family or anyone he loved to experience financial helplessness again. Even if it meant denying himself comfort forever. One line shattered me completely. "I know you were embarrassed by our life sometimes. That was never your fault. I chose security over appearance because fear became stronger than pride. Fear became stronger than pride." That sentence explained his entire existence. The second letter hurt even more. Dad admitted he heard countless jokes over the years. About his truck, his clothes, his apartment, even mine, including the one outside our house when I was 16. "I heard what your friend said," he wrote, "and I heard you laugh with him. But I also understood you were young and wanted a different life than the one I could visibly provide." I physically collapsed, crying after reading that sentence. Because my father understood my shame better than I understood his sacrifice. The letters continued for pages. Stories about hidden charitable donations, anonymous scholarships, quiet financial help to struggling families. Apparently, Dad spent decades secretly supporting people while living like someone barely surviving himself. Why? Because he believed visible wealth changed relationships. And according to him, people show their real character more honestly around ordinary men. That sentence haunted me afterward. Then came the final revelation. Dad didn't leave the money to me directly. Not entirely. Most of the estate funded vocational scholarships for working-class students across Kentucky, machine repair programs, trade schools, industrial certifications, practical careers. The exact kind of opportunities Dad believed society looked down upon unfairly. I inherited enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. At first I felt confused. Part of me even felt hurt. Then I read the final letter, and suddenly, everything changed. "Daniel, if I gave you millions easily, I would risk stealing the dignity that comes from building your own life. I already gave you the most important thing I knew how to give: stability." I sat alone in my hotel room staring at that sentence until sunrise. Because finally, I understood my father. Not perfectly, but honestly, his love had never looked warm, or expressive, or emotionally easy. His love looked like overtime shifts, sacrifice, fear discipline, protection. And unfortunately, children rarely recognize those forms of love until adulthood. Today I run the scholarship foundation created in Dad's name. Every year, hundreds of working-class students receive trade education opportunities because of a man most people assumed was poor. I also keep Dad's old pickup truck. Not because it has financial value, because it reminds me how easy it is to misunderstand people based on appearances alone. Especially parents. Before he died, my father wrote one final sentence I will carry forever. "The world respects visible success, but quiet sacrifice builds more lives than applause ever will." Now I finally understand what he meant. Have you ever realized too late that someone loved you in ways you failed to recognize at the time? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Because sometimes the people who seem least impressive to the world are carrying the deepest forms of love silently every single day.